It was nearly midnight when Daniel pushed open the sliding doors of the grocery store, his little daughter Emma's small hand wrapped tightly in his. Her messy ponytail bounced as she skipped beside him, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit. Daniel's face was tired, his eyes heavy from a long day of work and parenting, but he knew there was no avoiding this trip. Milk, bread, and a few essentials had run out at home. The store was quiet but carried that heavy late-night weariness, where everyone seemed to move slower than usual. A few exhausted customers shuffled in line, their carts filled with snacks and last-minute items. At the checkout, a young cashier in a wrinkled uniform stood behind the counter. Daniel immediately noticed something unusual, her hands were trembling. She fumbled with the barcode scanner, trying to steady herself, but the harder she tried, the more the tremor betrayed her. A can slipped from her hands and clattered loudly on the conveyor belt, making a few customers groan with impatience. One man muttered under his breath, tapping his foot as though the extra seconds stolen from his night were unbearable. Daniel felt Emma squeeze his hand. He glanced at her and then back at the cashier. Her face flushed red as she whispered an apology to the waiting line, her voice almost shaking as much as her hands. He could see her breathing quicken, the way someone does when they're trying not to cry. Instead of joining the sighs of frustration around him, Daniel offered her a small, patient smile. He shifted Emma's rabbit from one hand to the other and spoke gently when it was finally his turn at the register. "Don't worry about it," he said softly. "Take your time." When Daniel's groceries rolled slowly across the conveyor belt, he noticed the cashier's hands were still trembling as she scanned each item. The scanner beeped unevenly. Sometimes too quickly, sometimes not at all, forcing her to swipe items multiple times. Her lips pressed together tightly, and she avoided eye contact, clearly embarrassed by her own struggle. Daniel kept his eyes gentle, his posture calm. He could feel Emma tugging at his sleeve, whispering questions about why the lady looked scared. He hushed her softly, knowing that the girl behind the counter already carried enough weight without the curiosity of a child adding to it. When the cashier reached for the carton of milk, it nearly slipped from her grip. She caught it just in time, but her breath hitched, and she let out a shaky sigh as though every small movement was a battle. Daniel watched closely now, not with annoyance but with a growing concern that wouldn't let him stay silent. As she totaled the bill and pushed the receipt toward him, he leaned forward slightly, his voice warm and careful, like someone speaking to a frightened bird. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I don't mean to intrude, but, why are your hands shaking?" The question hung in the air heavier than he expected. The cashier froze, her eyes widening for a moment. The impatient customer behind Daniel sighed loudly, muttering something about just paying and moving on. But Daniel didn't move. The young woman's lips parted, as if she wanted to dismiss it with a simple excuse. But instead, her chin trembled. She pressed her trembling hands against the counter, staring down at them as though they belonged to someone else. For a few seconds, she said nothing. Then, in a whisper so faint Daniel almost didn't hear it, she replied, words that would leave him completely unprepared. The silence seemed to stretch forever. Daniel waited, his daughter pressing closer to his side, sensing the tension even in her innocence. Finally, the cashier drew in a shaky breath, her eyes glistening under the harsh fluorescent lights. She started, her voice faltering. She looked away, as if ashamed to speak the truth out loud. Then, with a small, broken laugh, she whispered, "It's because I haven't eaten since yesterday." Daniel blinked, unsure if he'd heard her right. The line of customers grew restless, but in that moment, their impatience faded into the background. She swallowed hard and continued, her words tumbling out as though she'd been holding them in for far too long. "My little brother, he's only 12. Our parents left us years ago, and it's just been the two of us. I only got this job a week ago, but the paycheck won't come until next month. We had barely enough money left for food, and I bought groceries for him instead of myself." Her voice cracked, and she quickly wiped at her eyes, embarrassed by the tears threatening to spill. "I thought I could push through. I thought if I worked hard enough, no one would notice. But my body, she looked down at her shaking hands. It just won't stop reminding me that I'm not as strong as I want to be. Daniel stood frozen, the weight of her words sinking in. His chest tightened, because in her story he saw pieces of his own, nights when he'd gone without dinner so Emma could eat, days when pride and desperation waged war inside him. He didn't know what to say at first. All he knew was that this young woman was carrying a burden too heavy for her fragile frame, and she had just trusted him enough to lay it bare. For a moment, Daniel just stood there, clutching the grocery bag, his throat tight with emotion. He glanced down at Emma, who was staring wide-eyed at the cashier as if she understood more than her years allowed. The girl's stuffed rabbit dangled loosely from her hand, forgotten. Daniel turned back to the cashier. Her face was flushed, her eyes lowered, as if she regretted letting the truth slip out. She shifted uncomfortably, muttering, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to say all that. You probably just want to get home." But Daniel didn't move toward the door. Instead, he took a steady breath and placed a few extra items from the impulse rack onto the conveyor belt: protein bars, fruit, bread, peanut butter. Then he looked at her and said, "Could you scan these separately for me?" Confused, she did as he asked, her hand still trembling but her eyes lifting questioningly toward him. He swiped his card and pushed the bag of extra groceries back toward her. "These are for you," he said simply. "For you and your brother." Her eyes widened. "No, I can't accept that." "Really, you don't have to." Daniel cut her off gently, his tone calm but firm. "It's not charity. Think of it as a gift from one sibling to another. You're taking care of your brother. That's something worth supporting." Emma piped up then, her small voice earnest, "Daddy always says we share when we have enough. And we have enough, right, Daddy?" Daniel smiled at her, his heart swelling with both pride and ache. He nodded. "Yes, sweetheart. We have enough." The cashier pressed her hand to her mouth, tears spilling freely now, not from shame, but from relief. For the first time that night, her trembling slowed. The bag of groceries sat on the counter between them like something sacred, simple yet powerful. The cashier stared at it as though it were far more than bread and fruit, like it was a lifeline, a hand reaching out to pull her from the edge. She blinked rapidly, trying to compose herself. "You have no idea," she whispered, her voice trembling, "how much this means. Most people just get impatient with me. They don't see me, just my mistakes. But you," she stopped, shaking her head as if words failed her. "Thank you, for noticing. For caring." Daniel felt his chest tighten. He wanted to say something comforting, something wise. But for once, words abandoned him. All he could manage was a small nod, his throat too thick with emotion to form more. Emma, in her innocence, filled the silence. She smiled up at the cashier and said brightly, "Now you can eat dinner too. And maybe tomorrow you won't be so shaky." Her simple kindness broke through the heaviness, drawing a wet laugh from the young woman. Daniel gathered their groceries, but he moved slowly, reluctant to just walk away. As he finally turned, the cashier's voice stopped him once more. "Sir," she called softly. He glanced back. Her eyes shimmered with gratitude that words could never fully hold. "You didn't just feed me tonight. You reminded me that there are still good people in this world." Daniel opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came. He simply gave her a quiet, respectful nod and led Emma toward the door. As the cool night air brushed against his face outside, he realized why he was speechless, because deep down, he knew he hadn't just changed her night. Somehow, she had changed his too.